Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Cup, Duet Reviews, brought to you by Cup of Hemlock Theatre. I will be your host for this episode, Ryan Borochovitz, and I'm joined today by somebody who is very familiar with being on The Cup. I think you're actually the most frequent non-member of the company guest we've had. You've been on many episodes, most recently the one we did on the Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, and we're so happy to have you back so soon again. Alicia Plummer, hi, how are you doing?
Hi, Ryan. I'm doing wonderfully. It's lovely to be back on the Cup. It's nice also to hear that I'm one of the recurring non-Cup members. So that's
Yeah.
great too.
Yeah, like I didn't crunch the numbers on it, so I'm not confident to say that you are the most recurring, but I feel like you might be, or it's
I'm up
certainly you're
there.
up there. Yeah, and we love having you on the show. You always bring such great insight into these discussions, and we're happy to hear your insights on this show, which what we're talking about today is I have it here because the title is long, so I want to make sure I'm getting it right. There is violence, and there is righteous violence, and there is death, or the Born Again Crow. And I've seen this very long title truncated as There is Violence, and I've seen it truncated as The Born Again Crow. We'll be ambidextrous about which one of those we use. This is by Caleigh Crow. It is directed by Jessica Carmichael, and it's being presented at Buddies and Bad Times Theatre in co-production with Native Earth Performing Arts, currently running in Toronto until March 29th, 2025. It's a very exciting production. We are recording this the night that we just saw it, on opening night. So lots going on in our heads right now, swirling around. We're going to get into it. We're going to have fun. Maybe we're going to tear down the system. Who knows? But before we do any of that, Alicia, I have to ask, what's in your cup today?
Great question. Today, I have just a classic good old peppermint tea. That's it.
Nice.
Just
Classic.
feeling warm and fuzzy inside and felt like drinking this today.
What does it say on your mug? I see there's words there.
It says life, I'm pretty
Oh,
sure.
it's
Yeah.
one word, life.
Life.
Nice. Just in case you forgot that you're alive.
Exactly.
I have in my cup also tea, orange pico tea. It's in my The Cup cup. Hey, that's the show you're listening to right now. All right. There is violence. ... The Born Again Crow. Alicia, do you want to get us started with a non-spoiler plot summary of what exactly this show is?
Yes, I'll go ahead and jump into that. So, The Born Again Crow is essentially about a young woman, roughly in her 20s, who ends up leaving her job in a very dramatic way. I don't know how much I'll say about that. I'll leave it at dramatic way. There's also some strain that she puts on her family, the neighborhood that she lives in. She starts to develop a relationship, essentially, a friendship with a crow that starts visiting her backyard. So that's pretty much a concise summary of the play and what you're getting yourself into. I guess I can say the genre. That's not a
Yeah, sure.
spoiler.
No,
Okay.
genre can't spoil anything. We use genre to set our horizon of expectations. So please.
The genre, I would say the words drama pop into my mind. Also absurd. What else is there? There's quite a few things. Ryan, feel free to
Yeah, no,
help me
it's tough
explain.
to pin down exactly the genre. I would say it sort of starts off feeling like a very kitchen sink realism. It's set in a backyard in a suburban home, and it feels very grounded at first, but then, as you mentioned, there's a talking crow, and then things do spiral into the absurd, which I think is a useful frame of reference that you've already pulled here. It's an interesting parable about millennial ennui, about the dangers of a capitalist system that exploits people. It's about reconnecting with nature through various means and social resistance to that very act. There's a whole big cauldron of ideas here that this play is exploring, and it's very fascinating. I'll also note that this isn't the first production of this show. I believe it's its Ontario premiere, but it has, I think, two previous productions, both of which were in Alberta. The playwright, Caleigh Crow, comes from Calgary. This play was published by Playwrights Canada Press last year. It received the Governor General's Award for Best New Play of the Year. So that's exciting that we're now receiving it and we can see for ourselves what this exciting new transgressive piece is. General appraisals, what did you think of it? Still
General
non-spoiler.
Still not spoiled. Thank you for letting me know because sometimes I just go.
We will have time for that later, but right now we want to give people the benefit of clicking off before we get too deep into specifics.
Totally. General appraisals. The second I walked in, I immediately was intrigued by the set and the set design. That's something that sometimes I don't really know what to expect in terms of theater, Toronto theater. Sometimes it's very minimal set, and sometimes it's the exact opposite, and it's a very grand set. So with this, since the play deals with connecting with nature, as you mentioned, Ryan, I really enjoyed the garden, the aspects of a garden within the set, and I guess costume's its own thing. But costume too. I'm gonna
Yeah,
say
of course.
costume too.
Set is designed by Shannon Lee Doyle and costumes by Asa Benali.
Perfect. Yes, thank you. They did a wonderful job on that. I just was so intrigued by the things that would move around the set and the noises that they would make. It wasn't necessarily a main. Well, things do get more absurd, and some things do happen.
Oh, things happen, all right. Whether or not we want to talk about those things now or later is a different story, but they happen. And if you're intrigued by what happens, then see this show and then come back to our other thoughts. But please, sorry, continue.
That's a great way of putting it. No, thank you for jumping in with that. Overall, set design was my favorite aspect. I know you said general, but I guess I was just on my mind.
Pretty specific, but I love it. Let's keep you. No, it's great. What did you like about the set in as non-spoilery terms as possible? If there's anything specific you want to pick out?
As I mentioned, just the feeling of being in nature, I really like. We're in that part within the seasons when things are shifting from winter to spring. So I felt very comforted by seeing the little grass sticking out of the floor and things like that. I just felt so comforted. Also, we were sitting close enough that I could really like see everything and the bird seeds. I enjoyed feeling like I was outside, even though I wasn't.
Right.
So it reminded me of spring. That's why I really
nice.
Enjoyed the set design.
Love that. No, so you've zeroed in specifically on the set. Is there more just like a general, maybe I'll frame the question, would you recommend this show and what about it informs your decision one way or the other?
I think the absurdity of it really engaged me. If you're someone listening to this or watching this that likes theater that is not necessarily ABCD format or whatever that is, I would recommend to see this show. I think it's also very funny. There are a lot of moments when I didn't expect to laugh. I was engaged. There was something interesting in each moment. I felt like the setup of the play itself, you as an audience member, I was wondering what's going to happen next. And the way the playwright sets things up, you kind of have an idea of how things might end, but it still exceeds those expectations. So I think if you're just interested in theater that's a little, the word that was coming to mind is bizarre.
It is bizarre. I think that's an apt way of putting it, and there's nothing wrong with that.
If you're looking for something that's a bit bizarre, then I would definitely check this out for sure. That's my general take on it.
Yeah, and I think because it does start off in a very grounded realism, like we were saying earlier, it kind of takes you off guard in terms of how bizarre it gets. And even we're introduced pretty early on to some of the magic realism elements. The Talking Crow, I don't think it's a spoiler to mention that. It's in their marketing. It's in the blurb about this show. But that's not the strangest thing that happens. And it does go off in a variety of very intriguing directions after that. If you like bizarre theater, this is definitely bizarre, but in I think a very potent way that really does engage a lot of thought-provoking ideas. I would encourage people to check this out, which you can do at Buddies and Bad Times Theater until March 29th, 2025. Okay, I feel like we've been struggling to do a non-spoiler version of this because this show, there's just a lot to say about it. Shall we put up a spoiler bird feeder that if you're watching this on YouTube, we have a spoiler bird feeder on the screen now. And if you're listening to this in audio only form, try to imagine what that might look like.
Okay, great. Yeah. We're now in spoiler zone.
Yeah, now that we're in spoiler zone, we could kind of talk about whatever we want. Do we maybe want to start with the cast? Because we didn't really get into them pre-spoiler.
Totally. Yeah, let's start with the cast.
Tara Skye, who plays Beth, our lead, is probably a good place to start.
Tara was phenomenal. I thought that they really, we just saw the play. I just want to emphasize that. We just got to our own places of home and we're reviewing, so I'm still digesting what I just saw.
I think everybody will be.
But I definitely thought they held their own for this play. They were, since they are the main character, they're in they're in pretty much every single scene. And I love to see their connection with the crow. That I found really, really intriguing. I thought Tara did a really great job of diving into that, I guess, magical realism of some sort. Yeah, I just thought they did phenomenally. I was also wondering what is what happened. Like it's kind of hinted at the very beginning of the play that something awful happened.
Yeah.
And eventually dive into that later on into the play. We're in spoiler zone, so,
yeah, so
I'm allowed to
talk
say,
about it.
Okay. Why am I scared?
Because the violence is righteous.
That's probably it. Thank you. When I say bizarre, I mean the play, like, quite literally blows up in its own way, and we get to see that scene. We get to see Beth, which is the character that Tara plays, her relive that scene of setting the superstore that she worked at on fire and screaming at her boss. And
stabbing a steak.
Yeah. The stabbing of the steak. Just, there was a lot of violence. It also felt whimsical as well, just the way there was feathers falling from the sky. I didn't know where to look at one point. I'm like, oh my God, what's happening?
Yeah, everybody was sort of bouncing around, and Dan Musso was doing weird things with the shopping cart and the big bag of rice flour that we heard about her burying another coworker. And yeah, it's wild. We're post spoiler. We can talk about it all.
Okay. It's so wild. So it was really fun to watch Tara say that monologue of why she quit and just reliving that moment, because we were all craving it. I know I was craving it. I needed to see what happened. So I think Tara did a wonderful job.
Yeah, I have more thoughts about that moment, but let's just stick with the cast for a bit, and then we will come back to that later.
Of course.
I agree. Tara was excellent. They'd had this really interesting way of playing the character with, I think I used the term earlier, like millennial angst or ennui, and that is sort of this disillusionment that sort of overtakes so much of their performance. But then there's this, through embracing the righteousness of the violence, as per the title, there's this, I don't even want to say reluctant revolutionary spirit that emerges from underneath the performance, but really does take hold in, and I think this also kind of goes into, and my mind is sort of ping-ponging between various different ideas here, but if we could also talk about Madison Walsh's performance as the Crow, which you mentioned earlier, was sort of the dynamic between them. That was really fascinating, the way that at first we're introduced to, like, oh, I have a talking bird friend, isn't this neat? And it's kind of like, okay, sure, Dr. Dolittle, let's see where this is going. But then there's like a pivot point just probably a little over halfway through the show where the two of them start speaking in unison in an interesting way, and the way that other characters respond to that. And I don't know if you noticed this. Sorry, now we're getting a bit away from cast, and specifically, I just want to dive into this text a bit because it's so meaty. With my little bird talons, I think I just did. I don't know. But did you notice that when the other characters gradually start noticing that the Crow is talking, none of them they all react like, oh my God, what? But none of them ever say, oh my God, a talking crow. And it's always, anytime that one of them reacts, it's always in a moment where Beth and the Crow are speaking in unison. So
didn't notice that.
I wonder, are they actually noticing that the Crow is talking? Or is the Crow this spirit that exists? It's something like Beth's revolutionary spirit, perhaps, or the part of Beth that responds with righteous violence towards all of life's injustices, and what they're reacting to isn't talking animal. What? Maybe what they're reacting to is, oh my God, Beth is snapping in a way that we are no longer comfortable with. I don't know. That's a thought that occurred to me, way off track from cat shoutouts. But anything you want to say about that while we've gone in this direction?
I didn't notice that. That is so wild that you pinpointed that.
I could be wrong about it. I'll preface this. Like, I would need to go climb back into the text, which is published by Playwrights Canada Press. And now I'm very curious to read it, to really sort of go through this in more fine-tooth comb kind of detail. But I'm pretty sure that was the case. And I think it's a bold choice that invites these interesting readings about what the Crow does represent.
Yeah. Now that I'm thinking back, and I do remember a moment when Beth's mom when she sees the crow talking, that was definitely a unison moment that I remember very clearly.
Yeah, and I think it was the
So,
same when Tanner notices it too.
oh my goodness, that is something. That's an interesting take. Maybe they are noticing like Beth is having an outer body sort of worldly spirit experience. Wow, interesting, Ryan.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'm intrigued. That's the thing. Something I do love about this play is that it doesn't offer any like straightforward, clear, easy answers. That it's just presenting all of this stuff that I believe there is like an internally consistent dramaturgical mechanism to it, but it's okay if the audience doesn't come to the same conclusions. It's confident in what it's saying to not have to spoon feed, which I always appreciate. Should we keep going through the cast? I mentioned Madison Walsh, who was amazing as this crow with this like cool punk rock makeup, this leather jacket. Again, costumes designed by Asa Benelli. And again, apologies if we're ever mispronouncing anybody's name. So just putting that as a blanket statement here. What did you think of Madison's performance?
Oh, I loved her. The second she appeared, well, she actually was the first performer we saw.
Yes.
Before the show even started. She was kind of
just
setting
lurking.
The tone. Yeah, lurking, setting the tone of the
carrion
play.
birds, they do that.
That's true. Just the eye makeup that she had on was just so well done. I was like, ooh, what's going on over there? And in my mind, I thought she would have the first line of the play, but then she goes away. And I'm like, oh. Yeah. It was cool the way that, I don't know if that was set in the play or if that was a direction, but either way, it was really cool to have her set the tone. Also, I really enjoyed her take on playing a bird. In my mind, I have an idea of how birds move. I'm sure we all do.
Yeah, they have the very kind of mechanical sort of the way they tilt their head and the sort of, yeah, sorry, continue. Describe how birds move. You're the actor here. So I'm sure, did you ever have to do like an animal study in theater school where you had to embody an animal?
Oh yeah, all the time. All the time. I probably have done a pigeon of some sort or something along those lines. So I think I was just expecting more. I started to move like a bird, but more of like the jarring movements and like the twitching of that a bird would do. But the way she embodied a crow was so creepy. I just really liked it, how her movements were very slow, and it just felt like there was a lot of thought in her actions, which made me think of the animal itself, of what goes on in a crow's mind. Madison held her own with that. I almost would have loved to see more of her. I think the play itself is written in a very specific way, but I selfishly just would have loved to see a scene where she's just flying around or there's just a monologue with retelling a section of her life or something like that, just because it was so cool to see Madison on stage.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think I like that the crow is withheld enough that we can be left with these open questions about what does the crow mean, how much of the crow belongs within Beth's psyche as opposed to existing outside. Obviously, the crows do exist outside because the neighbors are very furious by their presence, but this actual talking crow, possibly demonic, possibly righteous, revolutionary spirit is, I think the character appears just enough that we can have these questions, but I share your feeling of, what a great character. I'd love to, can we watch a whole second play of this crow? Here on the Cup, we've reviewed other plays with crow characters. We did one that was a puppet, the Family Crow, I think it was called, that had a really cool puppet crow. Maybe that's showing up at the top of the screen right now. I don't know. We've reviewed plenty of plays at Crow's Theater, but I think this takes the cake. This is a pretty new crow interpretation we've had here. I want to also touch on the thing that you said earlier about how the first thing we do see is this crow character ominously lurking, and that makes sense. That's what crows do. But because it's such an interesting aesthetic to the design of specifically the costume, and because the marketing, as I mentioned, spoiled the fact that there is a talking crow character in this, I think I might have preferred if we didn't have that little prologue sequence of the crow already on stage, because I think it would have been a more interesting shock to the system if when the crow first emerges as a character, if that's when we first get to see it. Because I think a lot of people would go into this production wondering, how are they going to embody a crow on stage? Is it going to be a puppet? Is it going to be a regular full-grown human in a costume like this? Is it going to be maybe some shadow interpretation here? And I think we're kind of robbed of that moment by introducing the character before being introduced as this is the Crow. And a lot of us probably inferred that, but I think maybe there's a different kind of gut punch we could have gotten from that. I don't know. I do like that we had that moment, as you mentioned. So maybe this isn't it's a good choice, better choice, and I'm not sure which one is which, if that makes sense.
That does make sense, Ryan. It definitely would have been a shock to the system to see the Crow appear or see how the
Mm-hmm.
Crow would appear throughout the play or that first appearance, which was still quite powerful. I don't know.
Yeah,
I really did enjoy
so did I.
the Crow just kind of standing and lurking. It was like a fake out because I was waiting for the moment of, oh, the Crow's going to say something. And then it just disappeared. And I'm like, oh, okay. Is the play starting? I don't really know. I just thought that was a nice way to capture the audience's attention because everyone slowly started to quiet down.
Right. They
And
hadn't dimmed the
realize
house lights yet. So that was
yes.
what introduces us to, oh, has the performance begun? How about the character of the mother, who, according to the program, is named Francine? I don't recall that name ever being said aloud in the show. We could just refer to her as Beth's mom, but played by Sherry Miracle. What do you think of Sherry's performance?
Sherry, oh, she was such
Yeah.
a delight to watch. What a
Mm-hmm.
breath of fresh air. She played the mother quite well. As you said, I don't remember ever hearing Francine, but I
I'm
guess that's
sure
her
it's in
name.
there at least once to justify that that's the character's name, but I don't remember it. She's the mom. She's a fun mom.
Yeah, she's a fun mom. She played like a quirky character, which was just so fun to watch, I thought. And the play itself is already dealing with some tough subjects. And I think just the way she approaches her daughter and the way she tries to get her daughter to get into bird feeding and just distract her from her current life in the state of her leaving her job in such a frantic, awful way. She did a lovely job and she was so funny. And I also wanted more of her as well.
Mhm.
The play itself is about an hour and a half.
Yeah, give or take.
So give or take. Yeah. I think if we added like 30 more minutes on there, I would love to know a bit more about Francine and her life and see maybe a 5 minute scene of the Crow as well, just
just
around.
just pop in an extra 5 minutes for give each character an extra 5 minutes. That's they're all so good.
Exactly. I think just the characters were just so fun and vibrant and also loud in their own ways, which I like. But in terms of the mom, I had fun watching her. Every time she was on stage, I was like, "Oh, she's back." So it was a delight. I thought she did a lovely job. Not necessarily related to her acting, but I really liked her outfit as well.
Yes. Once again, these costumes spot on. They're so good. Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. Sherry's performance, just, yeah, what a fun, just beam of light that every time she showed up on stage, just what a great presence. And the kind of interesting thing, you use the word quirky, I think, to describe her, which there's a little thread. I wouldn't necessarily call it subtle, but there's the part very early on during I think it was as early as the first scene, even when Beth and Francine were having a bit of an argument about the state of things, and in her anger, Beth explodes at her and uses a particular slur that begins with an R that is often used to refer to a cognitively disabled person. And the way that Francine reacts to that and it gets terribly upset and rushes out. And then they have a very sort of brief reconciliatory conversation about it later. It's not necessarily, they don't put too fine a point on it, but it implies that Francine is some kind of neurodiverse and that's something that she struggled with in her life, that it's something that people, especially when she was growing up, mocked her for using that particular slur. And I love Sherry's performance that she doesn't play hard into that angle, but there's enough of the quirks that you could kind of see that this might have been something that she struggled with. It's a very fine line that I think she danced with beautifully. I don't know. Do you have thoughts about that particular element of her performance?
That's great to bring up because I also agree. I felt like she just the way she captured the character. I again, she just brought this. You use the word like a light
Mm-hmm.
to the performance, and there were moments when after that first scene when Beth used the R word on her, there that was in my head of oh that wasn't very nice, and there were moments when I could see the mom just in our own world, or maybe not necessarily understand the level. Her and Beth also had a very strained relationship, but just moments where maybe she might miss a social cue or whatever the fact may be, and maybe seeing. She did mention she was bullied or kids used to make fun of her for that. So it was really sad to think about. But I thought the actor did a wonderful job of just playing the character as honest as she could be, and I think she just brought such a light to the performance.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Good job to Sherry, just across the board. Nothing new to add. But well said. And then last but not least, we have Mr. Dan Mousseau, someone we've interviewed here on the Cup. He played a variety of characters in this, most prominently Tanner, who is the boy next door. Beth's problematic ex, who we're first introduced to him as, oh, what an affable, charming guy, like Dan Mousseau is in all of his performances. But there's definitely layers of complexity here. And then, of course, he played various characters like Jim, the homeowners association man. He played the boss when we do get to the flashback at the grocery store. And he also played the lovely female news anchor, and what range that man has. What did you think of Dan's variety of performances in this?
Oh, Dan. I thought Dan. I'm laughing because there were some characters that were. Every character that he played actually made me laugh at some point, I would probably say. Even the more serious one, which was Beth's boss.
Yeah.
Also quite funny.
Oh, he had some, yeah. And I don't even know if those are jokes that are in the script or if it's just that Dan is so good at doing funny line deliveries that he finds the humor in everything.
Yeah, that's what I was also just thinking about that as well. I thought he did a wonderful job. I have no notes. I think he was probably my favorite to watch because he played so many different characters. Mm-hmm. So I was curious to see how he would play. Let's see. I think her name was Jane.
Let me see if it's the program here. It doesn't name that character. It's like French Canadian news anchor lady. Yes. Yeah.
I wrote down Jane.
Okay, you're probably right.
It doesn't have a last name though, just Jane.
I think she did have a last name that was something Franco-Canadian, but let's just call her Jane for all intents and purposes. Apologies to Dan, I guess, if her name wasn't Jane.
Jane. Well, I can't even remember what my point was. I think I was basically saying that I was just so interested to see how Dan would play the different characters. And Jane was just a very strong character. So I think that's why she popped into my head first. Also, she's the first character outside of Tanner. Mm-hmm. So it was like, oh, why is Tanner dressed like that? And then realizing, okay, that's Jane. That's different, completely different person, different accent, different mannerisms. So overall, it was really great to watch Dan. I think he held his own. Very strong actor, everyone had a very strong performance, but to see him play so many different characters, and sometimes it was a very short turnaround. Mm-hmm. So it was just fascinating to watch. Also, just he's pretty funny. Like I was giggling, and it was fun to see him play with the wig when he was Jane, and the hat when he was the mean neighbor that I forget the name of at this time.
Yeah, Jim, I think was the
Jim.
Oh, it is Jane. It says in the program here. I found it.
Confirmed.
Confirmed, Jane.
Anyway, those are my thoughts on Dan. What about?
Yeah, no, I think he's great. Like I completely co-sign everything you're saying about him. The one thing that I guess I'll just add, because yes, while he is very funny, especially when he's playing Tanner, the layers of darkness and depth that he finds with this character, who we find him so endearing when we first meet him. He does like the little Snoopy dance, and it's cute, and we think, what's going on with these two? You know,
I never thought he was endearing. I just want to say that.
Oh, really? Okay, interesting. No, okay, that is a valid perspective. I'm glad you brought that in. I think I did expect that there would be a turn, but I don't think I caught anything in that first little episode at first. And then by his second appearance, we're starting to see the clue. Once he comes in with the gun and he's like, "Oh, I'm going to show you how to shoot, and I need to protect you," they were like, "Okay, something ain't right." And then, of course, he takes a dark turn, and we learn more about their past relationship, how he was certainly verbally abusive, possibly physically abusive. He certainly has anger issues that are clearly unresolved, and he clearly has no intention of resolving them. He has this clear sense of entitlement, and the way that he handled the very calculated revelation of this information and how the character plays throughout. And as I guess you detected the seeds of it that were planted very early on. Good job, Dan. You get to keep your Dora this time.
Yes, wonderful work, Dan. I'm playing so many multiple characters, some slimy.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
actually, most of them were actually kind
I think
of slimy.
all of them are slimy, actually. Yeah. I don't think any of them are not slimy.
Yeah.
And that is a testament to his skill. You played 4 different types of slime.
Just in the way you were saying, he comes off so endearing at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I realized just the way Beth and Tanner were interacting, Beth clearly didn't want to be around him. So that's how I was thinking,
gotcha.
What happened? Also, Beth is troubled and she's dealing with her own personal issues, but I could tell he was adding on to the stress. So that's why I didn't like Tanner at the beginning, even though he was very adorable and with his little dance.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think, yes, that checks out. And I think if I didn't immediately catch that as a sign, it's because we know that Beth is clearly not in a good place.
Yeah.
And it's understandable. Like, she's being mean to her mom. And as far as we find, there's nothing wrong with her over the course of it. So the fact that she was encountering both of these characters with that similar type of leave me alone, I've just been through an awful experience, I don't want to talk about it. All of these people they probably mean well, but they're trying to make me talk about it, and I don't want to, and I wish everybody would just go away. That it felt like that same symmetrical energy from how she encountered her mom to how she encountered Tanner, which is why I didn't treat that immediately as a tip-off that there's a history here that we're going to learn about. And then once we do learn about it, of course, it's very clear why she was feeling that way towards him specifically.
Okay. I also see where you're coming from.
Mm-hmm. And I definitely see where you're coming from, and you clocked it right away. And good job, good detective work on your part there. Keep him away from that backyard. He's nothing but trouble. Nice. Other production elements you want to talk about in addition to the set and costumes that you've already sort of highlighted?
No, I don't think so. We'll see what happens. I think the set, since I immediately started talking about the set, you can tell that I enjoyed it. I also enjoyed the director's take on everything. Mm-hmm. I have the director's name.
Yeah, Jessica Carmichael. Yeah.
Jessica Carmichael. I thought there was a lot happening. There was a lot happening, and things get more intense as the play goes on. And I think just the setup of how it's the setup of how everything is done. Yes, it's probably written within the play itself, but the director's job is to make sure the audience is following along. So I think she did a great job within that. Okay, yes, that's it. That's all I have to say in terms of production elements.
I think it's great. I'll add to the set specifically because you sort of gave it this general, like a lovely spring backyard, the grass poking out. I love that there's the one moment with the dead baby bird where the grass gets like pulled out of the ground, and it's like shockingly long, and it doesn't like unroot from the ground. That's just like such a striking image of what is happening to this grass. It's like growing outward. It seems like endless. I don't know what that kind of ritual that the crow was doing over the baby bird, but it felt like some sort of funerary rites, unclear. Is it part of whatever type of consumption that the gift giving of this bird meant to the crow? I don't know, but there's like tiny little magic tricks peppered throughout the set here. It's a very simple one, but when they're practicing shooting against the cans, that there's the little way that they made the illusion of the cans getting shot. That was really cool. And this is the second time at Buddies this season that we've had an entire wall fall down. that happened also in the earlier play from the opener of the season, Roberto Zucco, that we also reviewed here on the Cup. But I guess that's just something that they're like, yeah, we're buddies in bad times. We kick down the walls. You think Theater Pass Mariah is the only one that can go beyond the walls? We're doing it. Yeah, just like there's so much great stuff in this set that Shannon Lee Doyle did such a great job. Shannon's also credited as the animal prop designer and mask designer here. So all of that stuff. Can we talk about like there's the porcupine mask that she puts on her butt? Okay, I'm unclear about what kind of animal she turns Tanner into. I thought it was a mole at first, but then I thought maybe it's a bird Did you have more clarity on what that was?
I'm laughing because I also was unclear, and that was such a chaotic moment. I'm like, what is that? Which made it cooler to look at.
Oh, it was stunning to look at.
I
But what
think
was
it
it?
was a turkey, like a tiny turkey. I just, that's the only thing that I could think of. I'm sure there's a very specific animal that it was, but how I interpreted it was I didn't see turkey at first, but when Beth took out
like
the puppet,
Beanie Baby type version of it.
exactly, that's when I saw turkey. So that's my thoughts, even though it's not like a turkey doesn't look like that, but that's how I thought.
Yeah, I kind of feel like they had that prop item. Like that doesn't look like something they necessarily fabricated for the show. It's like they purchased that, I would assume. I don't know what the actual production process was with this, but it feels like the costume version that they drape over Dan's face was reverse engineered from that. That's kind of the vibe I got because they look so strikingly similar to each other that, but I don't know what kind of animal. I think it has bird-like features, so you're probably right, something like a turkey or maybe some sort of exotic cassowary or some kind of like bird that we don't think about often. But the porcupine, I could tell that was a porcupine, and it helped that immediately before she transforms her boss into the porcupine, they have no, it wasn't the boss, it was the homeowner guy who becomes the porcupine. Apologies for this, my confusion around the animal transmogrification that happens in this play. But yes, when she turns him into the porcupine, it helped that she had a line before about turning people into birds and porcupines, and it's just so we had the idea of a porcupine already in our heads, and then when it happens and you see the spikes, it eliminated some of that guesswork, and I don't feel like we were given that same luxury when Tanner gets turned into whatever the hell that was. I think this is now that we're talking about, I guess, what is probably the biggest twist that comes in this, that, yeah, people get turned into animals. Ain't that weird? Do you want to talk about just that, I guess? What do you think about where the plot ultimately goes? Something that starts off as, oh, it's cute, she can talk to birds, becomes that?
Yes, let's talk about this.
Yeah.
I don't know how I don't know how this is even, like, what category does this go into? The bird transformation category, I guess.
Yeah, it's, I guess, just, well, let's talk about the ending of the show, or just sort of the various ways the plot develops, evolves, becomes increasingly absurd, as you pointed out earlier.
Yes, let's just dive right in. Something that connects to all this. We're talking about the ending of the play and how things get wild. By the end of the play, there's a bunch of crows. There's a bunch of dead crows because the neighbors decide that they're done with this. The birds are essentially, they're like pooping everywhere, and they're crows and people are annoyed. So they decide to kill the crows. Spoiler alert. I know we're already into spoilers, but I'm saying it anyways.
Just in case you somehow kept watching past the spoiler bird feeder and like, oh man, now they're ruining the plot. Continue.
And I want to just say, it's so smart because a group of crows is called a murder.
Heyo.
So, and now the birds are dead. Like, that's just such cool playwriting and so smart. And then to have Beth and the crow team up to essentially seek justice, and the first person that's turned into a bird or some sort of animal is Tanner, I think. Right?
I think you're right about that, yeah. Yeah, because when they first sort of open up the tackle box and take out the items and are assembling the charms, spells that they're going to use to enact this vengeance, he's the one that, like, they physically, like, use the force, bring him into the backyard, and they kind of, like, sort of trick him into thinking that Beth is wanting to apologize or, like, be into him or something, but then, no, that's all just the ruse to get him right where they want him.
I'm just thinking about that moment. It didn't take much for him to be like, okay.
Yeah.
She barely said anything. Anyway, I thought that was interesting. Yeah, so he turns into this animal thing. So disturbing. I couldn't look away. I don't know about you, Ryan, but I couldn't look away.
How could anybody?
I don't know why I'm laughing. I think it was just I wasn't expecting it. I really wasn't expecting it Tanner to be turned into this bird, I thought they were just gonna kill him. I thought they were just gonna, which would have been sad.
Yeah.
But
there was like a Little Shop of Horrors was something that came to my mind. I don't know if that's a musical or movie you're familiar with, but yeah, like it's, there was a real feed me Seymour kind of dynamic between Beth and the Crow, and the way that, after we've very clearly seen Tanner's true colors, he feels very much like the Steve Martin dentist, and like, okay, this is the person who just we can kill to enact some sort of righteous vengeance here. If someone must be sacrificed to the plant and or crow, it should be him.
Something else I want to bring up, when I see a gun in a play, there's that saying that it's gonna go off at some point. Yes, thank you. Wait, say it again so I
Chekhov's gun?
Yes, thank you. Chekhov's gun. But to actually not see the gun, we know that the crows were murdered, assuming by guns, but we don't actually see the gun go off on another human or a bird. So I thought that was a really smart setup to, instead of have a scene where we're seeing Beth terrorize folks with the gun, to have her and the crow team up to change people into animals. It was just so disturbing. I loved it. It was so disturbing, but I loved it. I can keep going on and on about this, but I don't know if I'm saying anything super specific. So Ryan, please jump in with your...
No, I like what you're pointing out here about the gun, because you're right. While it does fire, like we have the moment with the cans, and we can assume that guns were probably used to take out the crows in the neighbors' cleansing initiative, for lack of a better word. This is actually the second time this week, I think, that I've seen a play that didn't fire Chekhov's gun. I don't know. We're in spoiler zone for this one, but I don't know if it's fair to spoil another play, but screw it. It's my show. It's in Trident Moon. That's playing at Crow's Theater right now. We also see a gun that doesn't go off.
Okay.
And anyway, if anyone was hoping to see that soon, and I just spoiled the fact that a gun doesn't go off, oh well. But yeah, I think there's something interesting about, because we're also primed to, this is a very familiar playwriting trope, that it's, they make jokes about it in Archer of all things. Like, there's enough people know it that it's actually more interesting and subversive to not pay off that expectation. And in the case here with the Born Again Crow, what I think is actually interesting about this, and you're right to point out that if guns were used to massacre the crows, we don't see that. But that is man enacting violence against nature. And the righteous violence that we climax this play with is nature reclaiming man and doing violence against it. So if Beth or the crow had just taken the gun and shot Tanner, that would be master's tools trying to dismantle the master's house, and that ain't what we're doing here. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, and turning man back into nature, the very thing that it was trying to eradicate, is the more just punishment for the violence that they've enacted against nature. I don't know. That's at least my take on it. I could be off on that, or there could be a little piece of information in the play that I'm forgetting about that maybe doesn't quite hold up to that theory. That's what you've at least provoked for me by pointing out that the gun doesn't get paid off in a traditionally dramatic way.
That was wonderful to listen to, because that all makes sense to me. I also think you're right. It is more interesting to me to not see that gun attacking another human, just to hear about or just see the reference of it. It could possibly go off at some point, but to know that it was attacking birds, and now the humans are changing people into animals, which isn't, when I really think about it, well, it's still awful, and the way they did it was really disturbing, but it's not the worst thing. They're not dead, so it's just an interesting way to think of, this is your punishment to live.
I think Tanner might be dead though, because when she takes the Beanie Baby out and just like tosses it, like, I don't think he's surviving that, but but no, I do see your point that there is the opportunity to return to nature and coexist within the ecosystem, and animals die all the time. Just by turning into an animal doesn't necessarily spare you from that punishment. but
Ooh,
it at
good
least maybe
point.
gives you a fighting chance.
Very good point. You're saying Tanner might be dead. Oh
I
my god.
I think he might be. I don't know. Just the fact that she like dangles his stuffed animal corpse in front of Jim, who I don't think Jim is supposed to be his dad, right? That's not
What?
something.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah,
That
I
was
don't think so
never
either.
mentioned.
I had a thought at one point that it might be, but I don't think it was ever explicitly stated. And actually, no, he's probably not, because Jim's last name was Abernathy, right?
Okay.
And
Mhm.
Tanner, according to the program, his last name is Braden, which I don't remember that ever being said aloud in the show. Lots of names that we have to refer to paratext to learn about. Just the fact that like he plays both of them and they're kind of is, they're neighbors, and
Mhm.
it's not beyond the realm of possibility. Not that every character has to be related to every other character in that way. But I don't know, just the way that Dan was playing both of them, it felt like there was a gruffness to Jim that felt like, oh yeah, this could be the guy who raised Tanner to
Mhm.
have his feelings of male entitlement and toxic masculinity, that you could very much understand how that environment would produce someone like that. But no, I don't believe it is canonically the case that they are indeed related. I don't remember
That
what
would
got me on that tangent, but that was a thought that I wanted to litigate here.
I'm happy you said that. That would be such a plot twist. I bet you other people may have thought that, and that's why in the program and the
Quick, give
playwright
Tanner a
itself.
last name.
Yeah, I was like, no, two different people. But it also adds to the fact that I never thought that Jim and Tanner could have been related, but having them as the neighborhood folk added to the idea of people not liking the Crows and the tension between Beth and everyone else. So I think it was smart to have them not be related.
Do we want to talk a bit? I alluded to it earlier, but now I don't remember what specifically I wanted to say about it. But specifically, that flashback scene
Mm.
about what happened at the grocery store,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
the incident that I guess we're introduced to early on, like as early as pretty much the opening moments of the play, that we know something happened, and we're not actually withheld from serious information about it for that long,
Hmm.
because we find out that the mom does know some of the details, but not all of the details, and she spells them out. And I guess when we finally do get the glimpse into that scene, it doesn't change any of the details, or we don't realize that we were misinformed about what happened. But what it provides is a window into Beth's motivations and what was going on from her perspective. The fact that she was asking for a raise because she was having to do 3 times the work for not a living wage at the real Canadian Superstore, which I believe is owned by the Weston family. Ain't that neat? And I admire the chutzpah of this show to actually use that brand name and logo, to not have to change it to something generic. Just good
Yeah.
job. And the Governor General Award for rewarding that, which I actually now wonder. I would need to go read the script to see if it's the case that maybe in the actual published version by Playwrights Canada Press, they changed it to something generic to appease the Weston family, perhaps. And then again, the chutzpah of this production changing it back, or maybe it's just every version of it has been able to just do that, and I love it. Because like, why be cloak and dagger about the people who are exploiting these workers, which is what this play is
Mhm.
about. To have to dance around that would maybe undercut the point.
I think that's something great to bring up because I was thinking Superstore is a real place. Oh my god. Wait, everyone, Superstore is real. So that definitely crossed my mind. There was a moment when the Crow is talking to Beth and saying, this is when Beth is starting to feel bad about her actions. She's starting to think maybe I should stop. This is probably after the scene when Jim essentially threatens her,
Mm-hmm.
which was awful. He was very aggressive. And the Crow says, well, did any of the people in the neighborhood help you with after your breakdown? Did they try to help you look for work? Did they at least say thoughts and prayers? Did they do anything?
Mm-hmm.
And Beth realizes no, they didn't. They didn't at all. So I think that speaks to, I'm not attacking Superstore, but it does speak to a higher um what's the phrase I'm looking for? Word, not higher word, but it's a
Authority.
larger, a higher authority. Speaks to corporate, perhaps. But I think just that stuck out. That the phrasing within that stuck out to hire companies who are taking advantage of employees and things like that. I myself I actually haven't worked in a grocery store, but I've played a character who worked in a grocery
I saw the
store.
play when you were working in a grocery store.
Yes, exactly. So in a weird way, I relate, and
Because you
I
went
know
full method on that character.
I sure did. But I know just the playwright who wrote the play that I'm talking about, the one that I was in. There's just a lot of discourse on how employees are treated. So I think that stuck out to me, and good on the playwright for making that known. I also want to look back at the original publishing just to see if there has been a
Yeah.
change.
That's our homework for tonight. Find the script and check that out. Good job, Caleigh Crow, for really directing the focus against who's actually responsible for this exploitation. There was so much discussion, and I'm sure this is something you probably thought a lot about when you were playing the grocery store character in the play. What it was called? Was it just the grocery store? Or I forget.
Pretty sure it was called the grocery store.
Yeah. But yeah, there was so much discourse around then about like essential workers, the people who we deem important actors in our society to make our civilization function. You must perform this labor, and yet not compensating them adequately for that labor, the labor we have just deemed essential, while the CEOs of these companies make exorbitant amount of money off of the backs of that surplus labor. So, or the surplus value that is accrued from that labor. I know my marks. It's a very potent setting. It's also just, it's very relatable to be in your 20s. That's the best job you can get. And then you have to do it. And then they lay off people in your department and you're expected to do even more work and getting no additional compensation. What she's asking for isn't even unreasonable. I think there's something interesting also. This scene reminds me, when we get this flashback sequence, it reminds me so much of a similar scene in Death of a Salesman, actually, when Willie Loman goes to his boss to ask for better working conditions, that he wants to get off of the road and have more of like the stable office type job. He's been with the company for so long. He has so much seniority. Hasn't he earned it by this point? And that's also a scene that ends with the character who's making a pretty reasonable request losing their job by the end of it. Now it goes in a very different direction because Willie Loman doesn't stab a stake against the door and try to burn it all down. But I see like there's a very clear parallelism or influence between this sort of canonical example of the little guy not getting his due in the workplace, having to put so much of their self and labor into the job, having that job define so much of their identity, only to not only be adequately compensated for what they're doing, but having it torn away from them in an instant. I don't know if I had a point about that comparison, but it was something that came to my mind while watching that scene. And I guess if we're adjusting for inflation of the righteous fury that comes from this type of situation now, it's not surprising that something written in the 1950s is a very tame by comparison to how we're all feeling about what the situation might look like today.
Yeah. Death of the Salesman. I haven't heard about that play in a while.
Yeah, it's a throwback
but
to the 1950s.
It's throwback to the 1950s. I remember reading it for a course in university. I do sense the similarities that you did bring up. It's interesting that the Born Again Crow. I'm using the short version.
One of the short versions of this too long title.
It's interesting that this play has something that is still a reoccurring issue. It's very relatable, and also in terms of the ending itself, or not the moment of the ending, but the section that we're still talking about with the flashback scene, just the way there was a puff of air. Do you remember the puff of air that hit you?
Oh yeah, so it was right when the wall fell down and we were in that flashback.
That's what that was.
I don't know if it actually was it just the force of the gravity of the wall pushing the air outward, or was it like some sort of mechanical wind, probably just like a fan effect? I don't know, but like, yes, you feel it on your face.
Yeah, it was just a rush of, oh my god, what's happening? And the walls falling down. We see the Crow and Beth and the boss having this conversation. Just the way the Crow was so involved in it as well. There were moments when the Crow was sitting in Beth's chair. The Crow was turning around the boss to make him face the audience. It was just so intriguing. I could honestly watch that scene over and over again because it spirals into chaos with the dancing and there was money flying everywhere,
Yeah.
and the meat and the stabbing. Oh my goodness. I might have to go back and watch this play again, because I honestly just had a great time. And also there were some dark subjects, and sometimes I get worried that I love to watch fun things. I love to laugh and giggle. So sometimes I get worried that something will be too dark and it'll just be on my mind in terms of theater. As much as I love theater, I still have those thoughts. But with this, just the way it's written, I found it just very digestible, even with those tough subjects. So those are my overall thoughts, sprouting from that flashback moment. I kind of brought in my overall thoughts again.
No, I think that's good. We've been talking for a while. We could sort of wind down. One thing that I'd be remiss if we didn't mention, although there hasn't been an organic place to bring this up so far, is the interesting undercurrent of indigeneity that permeates so much of this piece. I think it would be a shame if we wrapped up without addressing that to some extent. Crow herself is, I believe, identifies as Métis and comes from those communities. And the way that Beth's Indigenous identity, and to the same extent Francine's, is framed throughout the story is kind of interesting, because it's not terribly front and center as the focus, but it's not important to what's going on here. And the microaggressions that various characters, and some that aren't even so micro, in fact, bring up in this regard. It starts as early as in the first scene with the gun in Tanner, where he mentioned something about like warriors from your culture. It's just like, it's so, yeah. And then in the scene that we've been talking about in the office, where boss says something about, being on the res, and she's like, what are you talking about? I never lived on a res. She lives in this suburban street. And I wonder, and this might be beyond my pay grade to get too deep into what this play might have to say about Indigenous identity, things about relationships to nature, how various Crow characters perhaps show up in pan-Indigenous mythologies and these types of things. But I think there is a deeper dive that I would encourage certainly Indigenous scholars and critics, and I'm sure some have already started unpacking this, because this show is a number of years old and has already won these prestigious awards and is likely to become a fixture in certainly the canon of Indigenous drama, and possibly Canadian drama as a whole, as the Governor General Award is trying to demarcate certain notable examples of playwriting of merit coming out of this country. I don't know. Is there anything you want to sort of touch on in that element? I know this is neither of our identity, so we don't want to necessarily say anything out of turn here, but I think there are notable elements of this that I would encourage and like to read deeper dives that other people take on this.
Yeah, I'm happy you brought this up, because when we were talking about genre, I was going to say an Indigenous story, but as you said, it wasn't necessarily the main. It was present within the play, the playwright themselves, and the characters Beth and Francine. Francine's the mother. It seems like it's their background. The presence of Indigenous roots and culture is within the play. So that is something, it is something important to take away from as well. I think even just the way the play was bringing up the connection to nature and the crows, and and Beth did mention, I'm from the suburbs, when her boss mentioned like, oh, from the res. It was just the way it was worded was just so awful.
Yeah, about like, oh, you think you can talk to me like you do in the res. Like, it's just one, you're making so many assumptions about communities that he clearly knows nothing about and her place in relation to them. Yeah, just so icky.
It was so icky. I would love to know more of Beth's thoughts on her own culture and how she feels about that. However, I personally, as a Black woman who enjoys seeing theater, I'm just always excited to see theater that I've never seen before. So the playwright Caleigh Crow, it was just lovely to see her work, and I would love to see more Indigenous stories, whether that be through theater or film or reading more, so I'm always trying to educate myself more as well. The overall play was lovely, but I'm happy you brought up that there is Indigenous culture within it, because that is very true, and I'm happy that it's there as well.
And I think there's something appropriate to the fact that whatever this nascent revolution that we see gestating in the latter half and toward the end of the play, it feels appropriate that it's coming from nature itself, the crows, whether or not the crows like pull a Fight Club, I guess, as we were sort of alluding to earlier. I guess we're spoiling Fight Club now too, but how much of the crow does exist as this real agent of human cognition and discourse? Can the crow actually talk, or is the talking crow part of Beth herself? And I guess just regardless of whether or not it's nature itself revolting, having an indigenous character, or an indigenous perspective rather, fighting back against the suburbs, against the Superstore, all of these structures that very much make up the settler civilization that has been built on top of the land that she is trying to reconnect with through her engagement with the birds. I think it's powerful in a lot of ways. And even if it's not something that they put too much of a focus on in the play, I think there's just enough of it that we are invited to draw this connection in whatever way that connection is meaningful to us.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Do you have any last thoughts, or should we leave it there?
I think I've said all that I should say, besides please see this play. I think there's a bit of something for everyone. I myself might see it again because I honestly just really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun watching it, and it's only one act, so you can get up and go right after when it's done if you so need to. So those are my final thoughts on The Born Again Crow.
Yeah, that's the thing. I won't say that those are my final thoughts, because I think I'm going to be thinking about this show for months after this. I think it's an appropriate place where we can end this episode as conversation, because we could keep going on and on, but I'm gonna probably wake up at 3 a.m. and be like, oh wait, there's other thing, and I should have mentioned that, and that's just gonna be my next few weeks. And oh well, you'll have to just wonder what else I'm thinking about this show. We're not doing a sequel episode. We don't have room in our release schedule for that. But what a fascinating piece, what a thought-provoking piece, so brilliantly realized by the director, Jessica Carmichael, by the whole cast, the whole production team. This is really just stellar work, and it's the kind of work that I love how chewy and ambiguous it is. And you aren't going to leave with the easy answers. The fact that we can keep re-questioning what we think about it is a good thing, and I'd love to see more shows like this. I think Ted Witzel's artistic direction, stewardship of Buddies has been very fascinating. We've gotten so many interesting works under his leadership. I'm very happy to see what next season has in store. And this season's not even over yet. We're still getting Shedding the Skin coming up next, and Genre Fuck, whatever that is. So there is more to come from this exciting first season under Ted's artistic directorship. Bravo to Buddies and to Native Earth, of course, who co-produced this production. What a fascinating piece. Okay, that is it for our discussion of The Born Again Crow. You know what? We're at the end. I'm going to say the whole title again. There is violence, and there is righteous violence, and there is death, or The Born Again Crow. We made it. Thank you, Alicia, so much for joining me for this lovely discussion about this fascinating piece. Where can our listeners find and follow you if they want to keep up with all of your exciting acting and playwriting?
You can follow me on my Instagram. My Instagram is Alicia Plummer. And if you're on TikTok, you can follow me on there as well. My TikTok is Hi Alicia by Alicia. Also, just a quick little plug, the Women at Plays Festival is happening at the end of March 28th to April 6th, I believe. My play, Oh Me, Oh Maya, will be in the festival, and a bunch of other wonderful plays as well. So please check that out if you are in Toronto.
Great. Thank you so much. We're looking forward to seeing that. That should be exciting. I feel like there's some interesting connections between what you were telling me your play, Oh Me, Oh Maya, is about, and the play we just saw, in terms of perhaps spirits over one's shoulder and what that could mean and what action it motivates them towards. I don't know. Don't let me put too much comparison on this if you feel like it's not apt at all, but fascinating stuff. People should check that out. As for me, you don't need to find and follow me personally, but if you like me and my theater thoughts, they tend to live here on the Cup. I should be plugging the Cup because I'm hosting this episode. We are at COH Theater on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Cup of Hemlock Theater on YouTube, where you might be watching this. Cup of Hemlock Theater podcast and all the podcast places where you might be listening to this. Okay, that's it for us for this wonderful episode. We've got plenty more coming up. There's so much theater happening in the city right now, and we can barely cover even most of it. But we're doing our best to cover what we can, so stay tuned for future episodes, and we hope to see you in the next one.